Angela. Nice. It's nice to talk to you. I'm so sorry you've lost your voice.
I know, thank you.
Ross, on the other hand, may be happy you've lost your voice. So I don't know how that goes.
He's not with me right now.
See.
So you can begin your session.
Okay. All right. Well, welcome to all of you. It's nice to somewhat be acquainted on the screen. I appreciate this opportunity. I'm grateful for Ross and Angela and the impact they have on people's lives. I appreciate their heart for ministry. And it's interesting in this day and age how God gives us all kinds of opportunities to share the gospel. I have a friend who said years and years ago, and I've found it to be true, that counseling is the new evangelism, that we're probably reaching more people in this day and age through counseling than in any other thing that we do. And so I'm always uh, glad for an opportunity uh, to see uh, how the psychological intersects with the gospel, and how God from the very beginning created us to be cognitive beings and uses that to impact the world. So we're going to talk about some emotional, psychological, cognitive things today, and hopefully do it from a biblical background, from a spiritual basis, and that's what we'll jump into. Before I do, I have to make a confession to you, and I don't know how you feel about this, so I'm not gonna weigh in on either side of this. But last week, I drove to Wilmore, Kentucky, and set in on the Asbury revival. I live about 5 hours away. I live in just outside of Nashville, Tennessee, and live about 5 hours away. And I will tell you, I am still, as my two sons say, Dad, are you going to cry again? I probably am. I am still just absolutely impacted by the presence of God. And again, however you envision that or whatever you see about that, it's had a profound impact on me, on branches, on the people that I come in contact with. I'm doing a marriage retreat this weekend, and I've already said to them, this may just be a revival. We just may do a revival. So
Mhm.
uh, we also have planned a men's retreat in about a month, and I'm already telling these guys, you just better be ready. I think the Holy Spirit's going to break out in the middle of the woods in Tennessee, and so I'm excited about that. And all that to say, it may happen tonight in this conversation. We'll just see
Amen.
where God leads us and what we do with this. Um, Let me tell you very quickly a little bit about me. I was a pastor for 25 years, and a pretty good one, but I also struggled with my own family of origin issues, my own personal demons. It created great havoc and chaos in my life. So much so that 20 years ago, my wife left me. My wife, had two sons at the time, still have two sons. They're grown men now. But Doris just could not take anymore. And I don't blame her. She should have left 10 years before that. And it was the best thing that ever happened to us. Even in the ministry, we were hesitant to get the help that we needed. And this forced me to do that. So I went to a clinic in Scottsdale, Arizona, and found great healing. In fact, I always tell people two things happened. One is God healed me. I believe that it did. I think there was a moment where I struggled with all these uh, family of origin issues, and the next moment when I didn't, when God gloriously healed me. But He also taught me the process of being healed and how important it is. So I say to people, it was God's job to get me clean and sober. It's been my job to stay that way for the last 20 years. God turned our lives in a new direction. Doris and I reconnected. We've been married 45 years now. I have two sons. I'll just tell you a little anecdote. My oldest son was a freshman in college at the time, and when all this happened, I went to see him, and he said, "Dad, don't ever come back again. I don't ever want to see you again." Uh, today, that son is the director of branches. I have retired, and he has stepped up and taken over branches. So God has restored our family. He's done amazing things. About 3 years into our healing, I felt very impressed by the Holy Spirit to go into counseling, to become a counselor. I went back to school, earned a PhD in clinical psychology, and what I thought, I opened I always say, a room with a shingle out front and drunks meeting 3 times a week. That's about as big as I imagined this being. But God began to bless branches. Today, we have 5 offices, 30 therapists. We see about 18,000 people a year, a lot of times dealing with depression, anxiety, suicidal ideations, those kinds of things. And so God has taken what, Genesis 50 is true. What the enemy meant to me for evil, God has meant for good. And God has taken that and turned things around. And that's really nice. Someone is commenting on branches in there now. Thank you. So that's branches, and that's what I used to do. I am semi-retired now. Although, Ross, I have found out I'm not as good at retiring as I thought I would be. I thought I'd be a lot better at this, but I'm not very good at it. I'm busier than I was while I was still working. So that's what I do. What I've been tasked with is to talk to you about kind of the origins of our depressive thoughts, and particular suicidal thinking, and where that comes from, how we deal with it, how can we respond to it, both in our own lives as individuals, but as ministers of the gospel, how can we respond to help other people with that? And I believe that we're all ministers of the gospel. Some of us do it behind the pulpit, some of us do it in the counseling office, and some of us do it on the assembly line. So I've kind of titled this "The Source of Pain," and I want to just kind of begin at the beginning with where the pain comes from, and then how that begins to play out in our life, and how we deal with that. Let me stop. I've just kind of thrown a lot of stuff out there really quick. Let me just do a check-in. Can you hear me all right? Is there anyone who's having problems hearing, or are you okay? You can kind of give me a thumbs up, or whatever, or everybody all right? Unless I don't know how you would speak up and say, no, I can't hear you, but I just assume that you can. So if for any reason you can text Angela or Ross, or text me. Ross, can you hear me okay?
Everything sounds great. Thank
Okay,
you.
Good. Oh, thank you. Elena says she can hear me good. So that's great. I am in my home office, by the way, and I forget all the time that I have a wall full of shotguns behind me. That has nothing to do with how I do counseling. I want you to know that's not a part of the therapeutic process. But when I get involved in this kind of conversation, and I look up and say, oh, I probably should have said something about that. So let's talk about the source of the beginning of the pain. And I want to begin at the beginning, literally. I want to jump into a scriptural thought, and then we'll back out of that and maybe come back to it and see how that plays out. God created a perfect world. Adam and Eve enjoyed presence with him. They enjoyed one another. We don't know for sure how long that lasted. The Bible's not really clear how much time there is between Genesis 1 and Genesis 3. We don't know. But for a period of time, all was right with the world. And then, not surprising to God, but not his original intention, the enemy came in and did 3 things. You remember the story in Genesis chapter 3 when the serpent appears to Adam and Eve, and the serpent says, "Did God really say that you cannot eat from any tree in the garden?" And then his next statement is, and Eve kind of explains that, well, God did not say any tree, he said this one tree. And she said, if we eat from this tree, we'll die. And then the serpent says, you will not die. You won't die. That's not true. And his final statement then is, God knows that if you eat this fruit, you will be like God. Now, here's the interesting thing, and you've heard this over and over again, I'm sure, but the interesting thing is they already were like God. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, God says, let's make man in our image. So they're already like God. And the serpent calls that into question. So three things the serpent did at the very beginning. The serpent said, you can't trust God. Did God really say? Yeah, you can't trust that. And then you can't trust reality. God says we'll die. No, that's not reality. That's not true. You can't trust reality. And finally, you can't trust yourself. God says, let's make man in our image. The serpent says, oh, you're not like God. If you do this, you will be like God, but you're not like God yet. So the original lies of the enemy were that you can't trust God, you can't trust your own reality, and you can't trust yourself. That's the source of everything that we deal with in terms of depression, anxiety, anger, marital conflict. Everything has its roots in those three things. I can't trust God, I can't trust my own reality, and I can't trust myself. Let me give you some kind of statistics to bear this out. 70% of all suicidal attempts. This was a survey done in 2020 by the National Institute of Mental Health. 70% of all suicidal attempts, both completed and not completed. If they were completed, obviously this is based on records before. If they were not completed, this is based on conversations with the person who attempted that afterwards. But in 70%, they reported a chronic anxiety. That one of the things that was at the root of all of their angst and their issue was anxiety and uncomfortableness, and generalized anxiety we describe as an uncomfortableness with the world around us. That could be mild. I just don't feel like I fit in, or it can be so severe that I'm a paranoid schizophrenic, that I'm afraid that everybody's talking about me, and I'm hearing voices, and all of that at its source is this anxiety that says I can't trust God, I can't trust my reality, and I can't trust myself. 21% of the population in 2020, 21% suffered with some kind of mental illness. That's 50 million people. 50 million people, and this is in the United States, 50 million people struggle with some kind of mental illness. Of that 50 million, nearly 36 million, about 2/3, again, one of the diagnoses was anxiety. So this generalized uncomfortableness, fear, inability to accept the world around me is at the heart of the pain that we feel. 5% of all adults in the United States, this is an interesting, amazing, 5% of adults in the United States, that's 12 million people, have had serious suicidal ideations, serious suicidal thoughts. 12 million people. Again, a small percentage of those have completed that, but to imagine there are 12 million people walking around that seriously have considered taking their own life or self-harm in some way. And 1 out of every 10 youth is diagnosably depressed. In this day and age, 10%, 1 out of every 10 of kids that used to be at the happiest time of their life, and now they're dealing with depression. Again, all of that back to what happened in the garden. So here is the result of that. And this is kind of the gospel according to me, but after 20 years of sitting in the therapist chair, I think this is true. I think that people come with three basic pains, three basic issues. There is a lack of a grounding authority. Now, that doesn't have to be spiritual. We believe from a Judeo-Christian background, we believe that we know. I do a lot of work with the 12 steps, and in the 12 steps, we will say, we surrendered ourselves to the God of our understanding. It doesn't, at this point, it doesn't matter who that God is or what that God looks like. When we have no authority, it creates a great deal of angst. I always say to people, I have a theology of fear, and that is, it scares me to death to think that nobody's driving the bus. I need someone to be in control. I need to know that there's someone I can count on. If you think about your own life, about your own circumstances, we used to trust the government. Very few of us do now. We used to trust the nightly news. I grew up listening to Walter Cronkite, and you could believe everything that he said. We don't trust the news anymore. We used to trust the educational system, and now that's suspect. Let's be honest, we used to trust the church, and we don't trust the church now anymore. We even used to trust our families, and we don't trust our families anymore. My wife and I last night went to a movie that my sister was in, but my sister is a stand-up comedian. She is not half as smart as I am and makes 10 times more money. It just doesn't seem fair. There's something wrong with all of that. That's where all my angst comes from. She was in a movie, so we went to see it, and kind of the plot was about estrangement of a family. And as we were driving home, we were talking about how many people that we know where children no longer speak to their parents, where brothers and sisters are estranged and don't talk to each other. We used to trust at least the family circle, but we don't, and we don't trust God. So you remember the first thing that the enemy said was, you can't trust God. And how that has played out is, you can't trust anything. You can't trust the government, you can't trust your family, you can't trust the educational system. So there is this lack of a grounding authority, and it creates great angst, great fear, great consternation, great anxiety. And it becomes the source, one of the sources of the pain that we feel. Does that make sense? Here's the second thing that happens. There is an instability of a world paradigm. We used to, I remember when Pluto was a planet. Pluto's not a planet anymore. How did that happen? We used to think we understood how the world operates and how things work. And with the amazing speed of academia now, and the things that we're learning, and sometimes the false news that we're learning, with all that's taking place, there is an instability of a world paradigm. I'm not so sure about what I thought I could understand. You know what? No matter what else happens, I know that the sun's going to come up in the morning, it's going to set in the evening, rain's going to fall, everything. And now I'm not so sure that this instability of a world paradigm. One of my favorite basketball players, Kyrie Irving, is a great basketball player, but he's also, at least for a while, was a member of the Flat Earth Society. He was sure that the world was flat, it wasn't round. And how does that happen? There is a conspiracy theorists all over the place. What about this? What about the black helicopters and people that wear aluminum foil on their head so the government can't read their? I'm just making that up. I don't know that people really do that, but we have this lack of a instability of a world paradigm. I don't know what's real and what's not real around me. So you remember the second thing that the serpent said. First thing is, you can't trust God. And what happened is, we quit trusting anything. The serpent said, you can't trust your reality. God said you'll die, but you won't die. That's not really true. And what has happened is, all of reality is unstable. I don't know what to believe now. I don't know. And that, as you can imagine, that creates a great deal of fear and consternation and anxiety and angst. It's a source of pain, where all this comes from. And finally, there's an uncertainty about self-value and self-worth. We have lost uh, our mystic confidence in humanity and in human life. We've lost that. Uh, there's trauma, there's abuse, there's the social media that's constantly saying somebody else is better than I am. All of this. There's uh, the plague of abortion that's taken away what human life is really has a value. All of that. And you remember the third thing that the enemy said. He said, can't trust God, you can't trust your reality, and you can't trust yourself. You can't trust God, so we quit trusting anything. You can't trust reality, so we quit believing anything. And you can't trust yourself, so we quit putting value in anything, even in ourselves. That, I believe, is at the heart of and the source of of a of the human condition of pain and suffering that we deal with. Now, we know as believers, we know the answer to all of that. You can trust God, you can believe in reality, you can trust yourself. We know that. But for the vast majority of the world, some believers and some not, they struggle with the unknowing, with the uncertainty, what St. John of the Cross called the dark night of the soul. They struggle with the unknowing of the world around them, and that creates fear, angst, anxiety, depression, and ultimately, as we're going to walk through this process, ultimately it creates suicidal ideations where people are so disenchanted, distraught, and in despair that they are willing to harm themselves, to harm others even. We're seeing more and more, and to harm themselves. So we're going to talk a little bit about how that plays out, how that becomes a reality, and what happens when we fall into that trap. Is that all right? Before we do, I want to. Angela asked me, or Ross asked me, I'm not sure. Somebody asked me to give you a little assignment. I'm going to give you a couple, actually. One, I'm going to ask you to take with you and work on after we're gone. But I want to give you an assignment for right now. And I know I'm catching you a little bit by surprise. This is something that maybe you'll take away and think about and work on a little bit more. But I'd like to ask you to take a piece of paper, if you have one in front of you, and to write down two things. And I'm going to ask you to report on the second one. We won't report on the first one. But the two things, take a piece of paper, and on the upper left-hand corner, write family roles, ROLE, family roles. And you don't have to do this right now, but under that, I'd like you to list the members of your immediate family: mom, dad, my grandma lived with us. I had 3 sisters. Just list them. Just put them down by name, and then write out beside that 1 or 2 words that describe the role that they played in the family system. Now I've done this 1,000 times, so it comes a little more easily to me. I don't expect it to come this easy to you, but just to give you an example, I would write my dad, and he was the absent dictator. He was not present. Even when he was present, he wasn't present, but he ruled with an armed fist. And you better do it Dad's way. The absent dictator. My mother was the peacemaker. Keep peace at all costs, whatever she had to do to keep peace. I'm the oldest of my siblings. I'm the oldest, and so I was the fix it guy. It was my job to fix everything. And I was, my parents went by that old adage when I was 11 years old: we're not going to hire some stranger to come in here and babysit. Mike can babysit. I'm 11 years old. I should have a babysitter, but I'm the fixer. I mean, I'm responsible. And that sticks with you, and you feel like my little sister contracted leukemia and died. And I felt like I should be able to fix that. I should be able to do something about that. My parents divorced, and I thought somehow I should fix that. Al Gore invented global warming, and I thought, well, I should be able to solve that somehow. We carry these labels for a long, long time, and it creates some of this angst in us. The sister right under me was the princess. She was beautiful. She just sat on her throne. Uh, okay, we stopped and started recording. What I'd like to ask you to do is to respond to this even now, if you can, and you can either respond verbally or you can type it in or however you choose to do this. On the right-hand side of the paper, to write family rules, R-U-L-E-S, family roles on the left-hand side, family rules on the right-hand side. And the rules are those maybe no more than 2 or 3 sentences that our family just lived according to this rule. This is the way maybe it was never spoken. Maybe we never actually said it, but we knew. Here was one for me. We keep dad happy. No matter what happens, you keep dad happy. That was a rule that we lived by. And so making good grades was not about the benefit of academia or improving yourself. It was keeping dad happy. You better keep that happy. I played in a high school basketball game. If when I got done, I looked at the scoreboard. I didn't want to know how well I did for my own sake. I want to know, would dad be happy with that? We keep dad happy. Here's another rule is we keep secrets. Never let anybody know what's going on inside the family, but we keep secrets. So you have rules like that. The Strongs are always top of their class. The Strongs always make great, some kind of rule like that. Now, again, I didn't give you a lot of time to think through this, but is there somebody that would say, yeah, here's what comes to mind. Here's a family rule that immediately I realize this is a rule that we live by, spoken or not spoken, expressed or not expressed. This was one of our family rules. Anybody? I don't know if you've ever done this before. If it's okay to ask people to unmute and speak that out, but is there anybody that would be willing to unmute and say this was a family rule of mine? It won't take too long. I'll give you just a minute. Now we know that Angela can't talk, so she's the only one that has an excuse not to respond to this. Anybody? That's a little scary, I know. Okay.
One of my family rules was that we gotta be at home before 10 p.m.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So, and I'm not going to make Angela talk about that because she has a hard time talking. Yeah. Tasha says, don't disrespect dad. Yeah, that was kind of my family rule too, Tasha. Don't disrespect dad. But let me just go back to Angela's rule. Okay. We have to be at home before 10 p.m. But also underneath that rule could have been the world is a scary place and we want to make sure that you're safe. The world is a scary place. So you see how those rules were shaped by our perception of reality around us. Somebody said everybody helps. Everybody has to help. Gladys says you have to be at church. Oh wow, that we must have lived in the same family, Gladys. That was my rule too. Yeah, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, Thursday morning visit, Thursday night visitation. Every time the doors open, you had to be at church. Yeah. So these rules are a response to how we see the world around us. The world's a wicked place, and we need you to be in church all the time. Hey, this family, somehow we got to make it. Everything's going against us. So we're going to all pull together. We're going to all come home. Yeah. Don't come home late as a young woman. Now that's an interesting rule. Is that true for a young man as well? Is there something in my rule that says there's a different set of rules for men, for women? You see how these rules, excuse me, these rules are dictated by the way we see the world around us. And when that is unsettled, when that is fearful, or when that proves not to be true, it creates a great deal of pain. Whatever dad says goes, no talking back. So we've had, thanks Elaine, so we had several like that. And that was one of mine. Keep dad happy. Tasha said, don't disrespect dad. Elaine says, whatever dad says goes. So what if we grow up and dad leaves, runs off with another woman, and all of a sudden, well, my rule was you keep him happy, and now he's not this good moral person. What about that? So the rules that we have based on the perception that we have can very often be a part of and we carry great pain. Am I supposed to keep him happy or am I not? Am I supposed to work hard or am I not supposed to work hard? I don't, do we make good grades? Do we not make good grades? All of that unsettledness creates a great deal of hurt, anxiety, and particularly when those rules prove not to be exactly the way we thought they should be. Does that make sense? And so what I'm trying to illustrate is that there are core reasons, really just 3 or 4 core reasons in us that we have this anxiety, this unsettledness, and because God is good and we found him then we know how to cope with that. But for many, many people, they don't know what to do with that. And that pain creates a cycle of self-destruction. When the world is fearful, when the rules don't make sense, when no one can be trusted, and nothing is really sure, and people don't really matter, when all of that is in place, then I turn to overt forms of self-destruction: alcohol and drugs, binge eating, reckless sexual behavior, overspending, even self-harm, cutting, burning, suicidal ideations, those kinds of things. Those overt types of striking out against against this unsettledness. Or what sometimes even more damaging is these covert, these not quite so obvious, just chronic avoidance. I just stay away from crowds. I just don't like being around people. I'm uncomfortable at church. Or we choose abusive partners. Have you ever wondered why a person continues getting in relationship after relationship with abusive partners? There's something in them that says the world doesn't make sense, and I'm just going to find something. What does make sense is putting myself in a situation where I'm at least I know I'm alive. If somebody's beating the daylights out of me, self-deprecation. Sometimes that's just funny. Oh, Angela, she is so cute. She's constantly putting herself down. Well, maybe that is this response to a frightening and fearful world. People just don't matter, and I'm afraid of what I'm going to be like. And so self-deprecation. And then finally, self-sabotage. So people who constantly find ways. They have great careers going and then they fall apart. They're good pastors and then they do something immoral. They're right on the verge of getting a degree and they drop out of school, constantly self-sabotaging. Those are responses to this unsettledness of not trusting an authority, not trusting the reality, and not trusting people around me. That pain causes us to turn to self-destructiveness very, very often. Does that make sense? we've talked for 35 minutes and we haven't even got to the problem. We just got to the underlying issue of the problem. And that is this pain. So how does that begin to play out in such despair that it becomes a suicidal ideation? How do we get to the point where someone would consider, at the very least, just dropping out of society, and even worse, of doing something to harm themselves in such a way that they're no longer a part of society? How does that take place? Well, here are some steps, and then I want to take you through a cycle of trauma, and then I want to give you some solution to this. So here are some steps. There's a history of trauma. There's a history of wounding somewhere along the way, an abusive parent, or being rejected in the third grade, or a grandparent that died very early. There's some trauma, and we've all experienced some kind of trauma. Trauma is just a break in the normal set of circumstances that I have to deal with in a shocking way. Well, I'll start using illustration. I'm not going to use this. Not my place to share that. So we all have gone through trauma where the unexpected happened, and all of a sudden I have to deal with something. There's a history of trauma, and then we begin to get a fractured story, which is what I have been describing. That I thought Courtneys were always good Christian people. I thought we always went to church, and now I'm finding out that that's not true. That the story is fractured. Maybe I'm the reason for the fracture. Courtneys always are successes, and I've been a miserable failure. I've never been able to keep a job. I'm unemployed all the time. I've been through 3 marriages. Whatever your story, this fractured story. After the fractured story, because that's so painful, we develop unhealthy coping patterns. I can't live like that, so I've got to cope somehow. Again, alcohol, or binge spending, or overeating, or isolation, self-harm, those kinds of things. We begin unhealthy coping patterns. We have failed attempts to correct. Oh, okay, I'm gonna stop drinking. I'm done with this. It's caused so much. I'm going to stop, and we don't. And then over and over, failed attempts, until finally there's just compulsive behavior. I just can't help myself. I'm compulsively doing this, and that leads to a hopelessness and a despair. That makes sense? I'm going to run through them again real fast. A history of trauma, a fractured story, unhealthy coping patterns, a failed correction attempt, compulsive behavior, and finally hopelessness and despair. And when we get to that point where there is hopelessness and despair, it's very easy to see how the only way out seems to be that somehow I'm going to end this situation. Now, it might be I'm going to leave my wife and move to Mexico. It might be I'm going to just drop out of society and become a living off the grid. It might be that I'm going to overeat. I'm going to become a golf fanatic, and all I'm going to do is, but I'm doing something to drop out. And ultimately, it may be that I have decided to hurt myself in some way, or to take my own life. 12 million people in America today seriously consider that. They seriously consider that. How does it take place? Well, here's a cycle, and then we're going to talk about getting out of it. First of all, we've reached that place of hopelessness where it's just, I can't see any other way out. We attempt to cope one more time. The coping doesn't work, and so I start into a ritual. One of the things to help you if you're working with people, if you're dealing with somebody who's just deeply depressed, and they're talking about harming themselves, and they just can't imagine going on in life, and then all of a sudden you're with them one day and they're just in a good mood, and they're cheerful, and that you see something completely different. Sometimes we think, oh wow, that's so good. actually they could very well have started into a ritual saying, okay, I've decided that I'm going to end my life, and now I feel good about that. So they move into a ritual. And most completed suicide is very ritualistic. They write notes, they put their affairs in order, they fold the clothes, they water the flowers, they do some ritualistic. We start into the ritual, and then they act out. If the acting out is completed, then obviously the trauma that starts the cycle over again for other people. If it's not completed, then there's shame and guilt in their life, and they start right back into that cycle again. So there's this terrible wounding, a final coping that doesn't work. I start into the ritual. I act out. If I'm successful, I start that cycle for my children, my children's children. If I'm not successful, it creates shame and guilt for me, and I start back into the cycle again. Is that okay? That's all I have time for. I've got to go. Thank y'all for no, I'm just kidding. That's my terrible coaching or counseling joke that I use all the time. I'll work with couples and we get right to this point of despair, and I say, well, that's all I got time for. Sorry, we gotta go. Excuse me. So what do we do about that? How do we respond to that? How can we help? Well, let me say first that we need to be healthy in our own right, that we need to make sure, and I mean, quite honestly, I don't know you, but there's a chance that I'm talking to someone right now that says, yeah, you've been describing my story. That's what I'm feeling. That's what I'm thinking about doing. And so the first thing, you have to be healthy in your own right. But then for those of us that are helpers, I think we put these things into place so that we can help other people go through the same steps. I've 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I've jotted down 7 things, 7 steps that I think are helpful in breaking this cycle of self-harm. And so let me just kind of go through them very quickly. The first one is this, that we pay attention. We begin to pay attention. We become aware of what we're thinking and what we're feeling. Joyce Meyer says we think about what we think about. We just pay attention. Don't just allow something to come up in you without acknowledging it. Pay attention to what's going on in your life, to what's going on around you. I just feel darker than usual. I feel more hopeless than I just feel more. Pay attention. So we just develop a habit of paying attention. The second thing is that we live in the present. I promise you that for any of us who go back into the past, it is so disconcerting that despair comes upon us. Or any of us who move too far into the future, it's so frightening. So we learn to live in the present in a non-judgmental, accepting way. This is who I am. This is where I am. God's still on the throne, and I'm going to live in the present right now. I wish this thing were different. I wish this person hadn't left. I wish this church situation had worked out different. But I'm going to stay in the present. I'm not going back in the past. I'm not moving in the future. Accept yourself. Accept yourself. In my own healing, I say to people all the time, I look in the mirror, I say, my nose is too big, my hair is too thin, I need to lose 20 pounds, but I like who I am. I finally learned to accept myself with all my flaws and all my failures, but to accept myself. Accept yourself. Number 4 is stop judging. I already talked about being non-judgmental, but stop judging. That doesn't mean just judge other people, but judging yourself, judging the situation. Most of the greatest lessons I have ever learned in life, I've learned in what seemed to be very painful, awful situations. But I look back 5, 10, 15 years and say, oh, wow, that was really a good thing. I see what God was doing there. Branches is a wonderful story of God's grace. And a lot of people are being helped by branches. And quite honestly, branches would not be in existence had I and my wife not gone through a very painful experience 20 years ago. So we just stopped judging. We just learned to accept where we are. Practice patience. God's timing is always good, but his timing is not always the same as ours. So I begin to practice patience, let go. Uh, I cannot continue to hold grudges. I cannot hold on to bitterness. I cannot hold on to unforgiveness. It's just not healthy. Doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. It's just not healthy. And so I learned to let go and finally look up. Do you know, interestingly enough, that studies have been done that if a person will just look up for 30 seconds every day, I mean, literally just look up, just look up at the sky 30 seconds every day. It does something to your neurosystem. It opens up spinal cord, and you actually are in a better mood. You actually cognitively are more able to acknowledge things by just looking up. So look up, not just look up to God, but literally look up. So those things you can do. Now I want to give you uh, 3 steps of how to begin that process. Uh, Scripture says that we're to take every thought captive. Here are 3 ways to take those thoughts captive. When I find myself in that cycle of despair, when it feels like God can't be trusted, the world doesn't make sense, and people around me, including myself, don't have value, then these 3 things: take every thought captive. The first one is interrogation. Take that, when you take a prisoner captive, you don't just take that prisoner and throw it away. You interrogate that prisoner. You ask it questions. And so I take a thought. I have a thought. Life is just not worth living anymore. I would rather be dead than alive. Well, wait a minute. Where did that thought come from? So if I take a prisoner captive, I ask them these questions: where did you come from? How strong are you? And what are you trying to accomplish? So where did that thought come from? Wow. Oh, you know what? It's been a busy week. I've spoken to a lot of people. I'm just exhausted. I haven't slept well. It probably came from that. I'm just tired. Interrogate. Where did the thought come from? What are you trying to accomplish? Or how strong are you? How strong are you? I felt that before. I am not going to do that. I come in all the time and say to my wife, I'm going to sell branches and move to Alaska. I'm just done. I'm selling branches. I'm moving to Alaska. And Doris has learned. She says, well, I can't go this week. Maybe I can go next week, but I can't go this week. She knows that's not a strong thought. That's not going to happen. So how strong are you? If it's really strong, then I need to take other steps. And then what are you trying to accomplish? Maybe it's just trying to steal my joy. Maybe it's trying to destroy my life. Interrogate that thought. That's one thing to do with it. Here's the second thing I can do with these negative thoughts, and that is learn to set them aside. So here's an exercise. I want you to do this exercise tonight before you go to bed. I started saying in the morning, but tonight before you go to bed, I want you to do this exercise. I want you to pick up 3 things, 3 inanimate things. This is an ink pen. Just without passing judgment, it's not a good or bad ink pen. This happens to be from my church. That's good to know. I stole an ink pen from my church. That's good. It's it's not too heavy. It's an ink pen. And then I lay it aside. This is my cell phone. I just have it all the time. It's kind of heavy. It's got fingerprints on it. It's got a case. This is my cell phone. And I lay it aside. 3 things like that. I pick it up, I examine it for a moment, and then I lay it aside. And then the 4th thing is I pick up a feeling and emotion. I have felt so angry all day long. I don't know. I just felt that. I pick it up, I look at it, I examine it. Where did it come from? How strong is it? What's it trying to accomplish? Okay. Just like I laid aside the ink pen and my phone, I'm going to lay it aside. Practice doing that tonight, and we can develop an ability to do that until it just becomes secondhand. And as a thought comes on us, we take it, we examine it, and then we set it aside. And then the 3rd thing, once we've done that, so you interrogate, ask it questions, then you set it aside. And the 3rd thing is centering, getting back to the place that God wants us to get back to. And the best tool I can give you for centering is breathing, learning to put into practice centered breathing. So 2 or 3 times a day, when the stress is coming on me, or the sadness is overwhelming, or feelings of unworthiness, I stop. I interrogate those feelings. I set them aside, and then I breathe about 4 or 5 times. I breathe deeply, but I don't just breathe. I listen to myself breathe. I feel myself breathe. I think about, what am I breathing in? What am I breathing out? And if you'll do that 3 or 4 times a day, particularly in those stressful times, then we begin to be centered again and back into that place where we can trust God, and where our reality does make sense, and where we know that we're a person of value, and we're not overtaken by these feelings of hurting ourselves or harming ourselves. Does that make sense? Is that okay? So there's some things you can do. Now, there's a whole lot more. We could talk about this a lot more, but I'm not going to. But there's some things that you can do to both create good health in yourself, but maybe more importantly for this group, to teach other people how to do that. So when someone comes to you, walk them through that process. Well, let's talk about where that feeling came from and how strong is it, and walk them through it, and then teach them how to let it go, and teach them how to recenter and get that back in place. Is that okay? So your exercise is to finish those family roles and family rules, and to look at those. And then what I would like for you to do is, without passing judgment, to let them go. The rule was that we always have to, we just always have to be perfect. The bitten courts always have to be perfect. No matter what, you absolutely have to be perfect. I'm gonna let that go. It's not been a healthy rule for me. I'm gonna let that go. Paula, did I?
I was gonna say, how did you know?
Yeah.
That
And
was exactly it, like up to a higher standard.
yeah. And what a wonderful thing, but also can be such an unhealthy thing. So I choose to lay that down and let it go and recenter. So finish your family roles, finish your family rules, and then take some deep breaths and let them go. All right. Thank you so much for letting me be here, be a part of all this. Angela and Ross, thank you for the invitation, and I'm grateful to be a part.
Well, thank you, Doc. Thank you very much.
We are honored to have you. It was amazing, amazing. Now, I would like for all of you to send your prayer request and your questions to Dr. Mike. So if you have any question, please, you can start sending it right now.
Yeah.
But I have a question.
Okay.
Oh, you are welcome, Elaine.
Yeah.
How we can identify when we are willing to manage a trauma or not?
When you're managing trauma, when you're handling it healthily?
When you can do it, and when you need to say, no, I need help to handle it.
Yeah. I think there are maybe 3 things. One is intrusive thinking. I cannot get away from this. I think I've got, and then it's just intrusive thinking. It just keeps coming back, and coming back. When I can't break that cycle of intrusive thinking, very often it's more than I can handle. I need to get help. The second thing is an unattached anger. As I was going through the struggle, my youngest son said to his mom, "Is Dad mad at us?" And Doris was wise enough to say, "No, Dad's just mad. He's not mad at us. He's just mad." This unattached anger that I don't know where it comes from. Very often it's because that when that's present. And then the final thing is just what we're talking about. When I move into a dangerous kind of behavior, even I'm just not sleeping anymore. Or I used to exercise and now I don't. I move into some kind of unhealthy pattern of behavior. When those things are taking place, then I think probably this trauma is more than I can handle on my own. And I'm a little bit prejudiced, but I always think seeing a good counselor every once in a while is a good thing. So somebody else I think has a question, but let me just say, making a very shameless plug, every Monday I do a brief little 7-minute podcast called Monday Matters. And you can go to YouTube at C. Michael Courtney. My name is Charles Michael Courtney, at C. Michael Courtney. And that Monday Matters. And I deal with these kinds of things every week, just 7 or 10 minutes about that. Or I also have a blog called branchesblog.com. And you could go to either one of those things and get more information. And I'd be, or if you have questions that perhaps, you don't want to ask publicly, that's fine. Then you can contact me there, email me or something like that. Someone said, what to do if breathing is not enough to manage your anxiety? That's a great question. 2 or 3 things. One very simple thing, drinking water. Drink a lot of water. Anxiety is produced by adrenaline in our body with the old fight or flight. Now we can't do either one. Adrenaline, and that creates this feeling thing. Drinking a lot of water dilutes that. Drinking water. Physical movement. Just taking walks, getting up, moving. In fact, I usually say to people, when this anxiety begins to overwhelm you, change your thinking, change your behavior, and change your location. Just get up, do something different, and think about something different. So drinking a lot of water, physical movement, and then as simple as it sounds, devotional reading the Psalms, just reading the Psalms over and over again. Those are 3 great tools to help with anxiety. And if it continues to be too much, then you can see someone who can help with. Good. All right. Well, thank you all so much. Again, if you'd like to email mcourtney@branches. I should have written these things down. Sorry, I don't think about that. mcourtney@branches.com. Today was a especially hard day for me. Mentally, I've never before felt the way that I did today. Thank you for saying that, Elena. And to be candid, speaking it out is very important. It's very powerful. What I would encourage you to do is to find someone, maybe in this group, someone that you can connect with, and talk through that, and make sure that they can help you. Thanks for being willing to say that. All right.
Thank you so much,
Thank you, Angela. Yeah.
Dr. Courtney, for your time.
It's my
We
privilege.
truly appreciate you and your teachings tonight.
It's my privilege. Thank you all, every one of you. Thank you, and God bless you.
Yes, I'm going to ask you if you can pray.
Oh, I would love to. Yes, I would love to. Yes, I would love to. Father, you have been here. We have sensed your presence, even in this computer screen and questions and responses. You love us with an everlasting love. And for all the things that we know and all the tools that we think we have, nothing works better than an intimate relationship with you. May that be true for us. May we all experience our own Asbury revival and know the power of the Holy Spirit descending upon us. I pray for Elaine especially today, that you would comfort her in this very, very difficult day and help her to know that she is loved. I pray for Angela, and that you would touch her and wrap your arms of love and care around her, and each person on this screen. We love you, we're grateful for you, and we are so privileged to be called your little children. In your name we pray, amen. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. We appreciate you very much.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye, everyone. Gracias por habernos acompañado hoy. Nos vemos la próxima semana. Les amamos demasiado. Bye bye.